futuristic facilities management. Because there's almost an irony, isn't there, here in the region? Sometimes the quality of FM in the media region, it lags behind more developed markets, and we've heard examples of that earlier on this morning, and yet, paradoxically, the UAE and Saudi Arabia in particular are some of the world's fastest growing facilities management markets. Some leaders are using these markets to innovate and to create new thinking within facilities management. So the question is, how can the region's new facilities management leaders set the stage for new world-class FM? In other words, not just take best practice and the best technology from other markets, but in some ways create best practice and create new technology and offer that to the world. That is one of the challenges we faced. Panel of 4 people joining us on stage to do that. I introduced them briefly a couple of moments ago. If I can turn first of all to Mick Dalton, to my immediate left, Director of FM with Meras Holdings, one of the biggest and I would say most active developers here, particularly in Dubai at the moment. We were chatting earlier about the thing that really matters to you, the thing you really care about at the moment. And you said it's efficiency, it's getting value for money. Why is that such a big deal for you?
I think we're in a world of energy efficiency. Quite simply, all around the world, governments are trying to save energy, oil is depleting. We're consuming all of our oil in every country in the Middle East, and we build buildings, we over-engineer buildings, we put too much capacity into our buildings. Our chilled water plants in the chilled water companies are so high, the bills are so costly for tenants and building owners. So, to me, the government with the regulator about energy efficiency, energy auditing, energy retrofitting, I think is the right way to go. Putting labels on buildings, having energy performance criteria of buildings, something we did back in the UK 15 years ago, is something we should be doing here. The red rating, the amber rating, the blue rating for buildings is something passionate to my way of thinking.
So that's something that Ali is working on and his people are working on. But again, should that be coming from, would you say, from a non-profit organisation, or should it be coming from the government? Where's the most effective place for this to come from?
Well, the government can set a strategy, but it's up to the private sector to implement it. You're never going to get a government take the lead and actually say, we're doing everything and the rest of the market is doing nothing. When we implemented the regulations in Europe 10 years ago on energy performance in buildings, the display energy certificate regulations, I was actively involved as the chairman of the British Institute of Facilities Management. So the government were asking us to be involved, engage with them, to make sure that it didn't overburden the industry in terms of actually putting labels onto buildings. And I think for the FM industry to be leading the way here and pushing it to government is another way to do it. It's a better way to do it. We'll actually carve the legislation the way we want it to be.
And this is one of the great things, and I mentioned in my introduction, that the region, particularly the UAE and Saudi, can actually lead. In some ways we lag behind simple best practice from Europe 15 years ago, but you get a chance not just to catch up, but to leapfrog over them.
Absolutely.
So what could be, give us an example of something that we could do, a developer like Miras or a country like the UAE, a city like Dubai that could do in, I don't know, smart city technology, even better than they're doing in Dusseldorf or wherever else.
Well, I could talk about the open-air air conditioning in our mall, but I won't talk about that.
60 seconds, talk about the open-air air conditioning in your mall.
Well, no, we're pioneering a new technology in the UAE, which is something that's never been done. We're looking at putting outdoor air conditioning in a shopping mall, in an outdoor shopping mall, to keep the shoppers cool as they walk around the mall. And the same technology is being used in Qatar in the stadiums to cool the football stadiums. So we're doing it here first in the UAE before it goes into Qatar.
And are you able to do it, to come back to your original point, and then I'll move on, I'll leave you alone, efficiently, cost effectively? Or is it going to cost a fortune in money and a fortune in energy?
The design is such that we take away the return air from our cooling systems and actually recycle it to cool the outdoor air. So we're actually utilising the wasted energy, wasted air. So it's done very efficiently in the real sense.
Gundeep Singh of the Change Initiative, you built here in Dubai on Sheikh Zayed Road one of the world's most efficient buildings. I think I've got some of the numbers here. The Change Initiative building here in Dubai, it is the highest LEED rated building in the world, 107 out of 110 points. It's a world record that's won more than 55 awards for sustainability in terms of execution, design, MEP, and concept. So what can we learn from that? It's a prototype building. Not every building is going to be that good. But what lessons can we learn from that prototype that guys like Mick can take into a more mass market environment?
The first thing is that not everything works. We put in around 2,000 solutions in the building, and when you look at the entire spectrum of sustainable solutions that are available today, you have to first go and ask the question, what really works and what's commercially viable? I think today sustainability, as we describe it, is not just about feeling good or just about affecting change, it's also commercial viability. So I think this building very strongly puts a foundation out there to find out solutions that can really work commercially and the ones that don't work.
And I guess this is something that we often talk about in terms of innovation. When we think of innovation in any space, Silicon Valley, we tend to think about technological innovation. We think about men and women in white coats in a laboratory inventing something cool. But often innovation is in terms of processes, isn't it? Like Emirates innovated the global aviation industry, not by inventing new airplanes, just the way you develop route maps. So sometimes it's process innovation, isn't it, Gundeep? And you talk about balancing something as simple as CapEx and OpEx. If you can change the way we do the maths on CapEx versus OpEx, that can be a game changer, can't it?
Yeah, I think most of the sustainability that I've looked at rests squarely in the area of technology. And technology, as a matter of fact, is an amplifier of human ability, not human intent. And when I compare OpEx and CapEx, you're trying to understand where the intention lies. If you want to make profits now, and if you want to show the results immediately, then you're talking about OpEx. But if you want to invest strategically, which I think is a much harder word to look at today, then you're talking about investing into the future. And whenever I talk about facilities management, you're really trying to understand what's the net cost of the life of the building over the life of the building, rather than asking the question what it is today.
In fact, we're not an FM service provider. In the jointly owned property regime that we operate in fact, there's been a seismic shift in the category of businesses that FM service providers are operating in. For example, you've got hospitality, you've got commercial buildings, you've got single-owned landlord-type buildings. In the jointly owned property market, we're dealing with a huge number of residential, commercial, mixed-use properties that are individually unit-owned by a large number of people. And the challenge for us is trying to get maybe 400, 500, 700 different residential owners or commercial owners in one building to agree on what the facilities, services they require. And you can imagine sometimes it's a little bit like herding cats, but what we have to do is we have to understand the expectations of the people that are in our buildings. We have to understand what their needs are, and we have to, at all times, focus on the costs of the services that are provided in that building. Because at the end of the day, the biggest impact our management will have on any building that we operate in is the service charge cost, the annual cost to the unit owner. And the FM service providers, in all aspects, whether they're a specialist service provider or whether they're a company such as Emerald that provides a large category of services, it's all about how they are going to impact on the bottom line and service charges in our building along with the services that they provide.
And you're an accountant, aren't you? That's your background, a chartered accountant.
I'm sorry, repeat that?
You're a chartered accountant, are you not?
Yes, that's right.
So you understand the numbers. One of the things I was thinking of in the context of what you do and futuristic facilities management was maybe big data. And I know data is one of the things that the organisers here have highlighted. How can you take big data maybe just to better understand what's going on, to give you more visibility about what the service charge is going on? That would help, I guess, wouldn't it?
Yeah, there has been a large amount of work put into that in terms of benchmarking what service charges are across Dubai. The regulator, RERA, has taken a lot of trouble in benchmarking where they believe service charges should sit. But the biggest issue surrounding that is that the setup of the buildings. Every building or every tower is different. And we're talking about retrofitting meters, for example, or we're talking about supply of energy into the buildings.
in a tower that doesn't have any meters for chilled water delivery into the units, you'll have a massive service charge which consists of maybe 60% of the cost being Palm District cooling, compared to buildings which are able to separate those costs out and charge them to the end users. So across the board, it's really difficult to benchmark service charge costs in building because of the configuration of the building itself.
To what extent can some of this stuff be retrofitted? Or maybe let me ask the question differently. There's probably a category of stuff that can be retrofitted cost effectively, and a category of stuff that just cannot be cost effectively retrofitted. What are the things that we can retrofit cost effectively?
Okay, well, probably the biggest one that you're always going to be looking at is your district cooling meter. To measure the supply of chilled water into a unit. You may not be aware of the fact that something like 85 to 90% of the towers in JLT, for example, don't have district cooling meters. And so there's two things that come out of that. Firstly, the service charge is going to be massively increased because the total building consumption is going to be included in your service charge. And secondly, from an energy efficiency perspective and a carbon footprint, you're going to have a real problem because someone's going to be living in their unit running it at 18 degrees with all the doors and the windows open all day long, and it doesn't impact on them in terms of having to pay for the consumption. So in terms of retrofitting, every building again is different. It's a design issue, whether you can even retrofit meters. In some towers you can't because there's maybe not enough space in the ceiling, or the design features are such that the retrofitting is not an option. And every tower is different. There are towers that we have retrofitted successfully and some that we just cannot.
Jason, turning to you, you talked about some fairly futuristic technology at Masdar that they're using. You'd expect that in Masdar. I mean, their whole thing is the future energy city. More mainstream, what are some of the technologies or processes or ideas that you think can make a really big difference that the UAE, Saudi Arabia, other GCC states can really pioneer globally?
So I think...
Yeah, I think it's on.
Yeah. So I think for me, it's Chris touched on it. Alan touched on it with his big data analytics. We're now seeing CAFM systems that kind of help with the facilities management when we do stuff, how we do it, when we do it. Things like energy meter readings. All this information interrogated in the right way drives the right response. So things like a BTU meter in a tower, because at the moment is that the cost of the spend for the bill is split against properties, not usage. Okay, so the guy on the top floor with the penthouse leaves his doors open when he's having a barbecue in the middle of summer because he knows the share of the cost is split against the owners. But if you had a device that when you open your doors, it switches off your AC, and the second one is if you're only being charged for what you actually use, can you imagine the behavior that would drive in the building? Every time you go out, you would turn your AC off just because it saves you. You can physically see the saving walking out from the building. Things like DEWA, having all that data being brought into a centralized location. If there's 100 villas exactly the same and one villa is using double consumption, could government go in there and say, look, can we help you? Is there something wrong? Is there some support? Have you got the wrong ACs? Is it maintenance? But you can then actually make fundamental changes, provide services that support around it. For us, it's around efficiency. So working with clients, they want to get best value. Are my technicians doing 6 jobs a day, or are they doing 10 jobs a day? And what we need to capture now is how long are they spending on a job? How many jobs are they finishing in a day? And to do that, I need to use big data. I need to use mobility solutions to capture when they start the job, finish the job. And I don't have the same level of supervision now to go to the site. So I have to use the photos they take with the mobility solution to go do it. So there's a lot of technology. I think big data is where fundamentally those changes, because there'll be something new coming online every time. And if I can come to you and say, you've got this AC and you're paying this much for your bill, I've got this AC, and if you put it in, you'll pay for it within 2 years. And if it's your property, would you buy that off me? You probably would.
I did buy it off, well, not you, but a man called Jesus, who came around to the villa that we rent, and I think Gundeep, it was someone you know, Tatiana, who put me in touch with him. And you never quite know if he's a snake or a salesman, or if he's actually reduced my AC bill, but we gave him 2,500 dirhams or something like that. He claims he put some widgets in our air conditioning, fired a gun at our windows, and it was all quite cool and technology friendly. And that works even in a rental property, which obviously the vast majority of people in a city, certainly like Dubai, live in. We've got about 10 more minutes with this panel. Keen to throw it out to comments or questions from the audience. So, do we have some microphones? Yeah, we do. Oh, a couple of people have got microphones. Fabulous. We've got a great panel here. Who's got the first comment or question? Yes, please, sir. Gentleman in the blue tie. Thank you.
Hello. A very simple question, and I would expect probably an answer from each of you. What is the one thing that you would expect to see come to the fore of facilities management in the next 5 to 10 years in this region?
Okay, very good. Well, I'll throw it open to each of you. The one thing that you think will come to the fore in facilities management in this region. Jason, let's start with you and work back towards me.
Okay, so MEFMA already touching on it. It's education. They're trying to put the programs and foundations around to allow facility managers to be delivered in at a certain standard, providing both energy management, performance, client engagement, how to do maintenance effectively. So for me, as education is going to come key. At the moment, the education is brought in remotely and it disappears. So things like Heriot-Watt University, MEFMA, tying all that together to make sure that it supports not just the FM, but the client side of how to do facilities management and give them the tools to be more effective in the way that they do their service.
Alan.
Yeah, I agree with education entirely. Experience or professional qualification in the field that they should be operating in, whereas typically today you'll get the guy who comes in on the electrician today and tomorrow he's the plumber. So that, as well as just overall delivery of service, and I think data capture in an emerging environment such as we have here, where everything is new in the Middle East in terms of FM delivery, and we don't have a lot of data. I think that over time, that data collection will assist in providing proper FM services.
Gundeep.
I would probably go for a regulation around benchmarks. I think one of the missing things out in the community I see is that everybody does their own thing and they have different ways of looking at it. Efficiency is not very well defined. It is a structure where you live in a box, you live in that building box where BMS delivers data, and that data may or may not be in context with the whole community at large. So I think with the appropriate sensing technology, with the entire structure being built in at a let's say city level or even the country level, building a regulation that aims for certain benchmarks would be critical, and that could drive FM in the back end strategically.
Mick from Meras.
For me, it's about technology. If you look at the way, if you go onto Google and type in computer-aided FM
If you can talk
system,
a bit closer to the microphone.
yeah, if you go onto Google and type in computer-aided FM, you'll find 160,000 systems are out there. If you go into Google and type in BIM, there's thousands of articles there. If you go into Google and talk about collaboration software, many articles. When you start looking from end to end of the construction life cycle to the operational life cycle, the amount of data that gets lost at handover, at design stage, concept stage, detailed stage, and FM has missed out in many of those places. You get to the end game where you end up with a building with not the right manuals, not the right information. You can't get the products, as Jason pointed out. I think the integration of technology between BIM and collaboration software and CAFM has got to come.
Thank you. Jesus Gutierrez was the guy who took my 2,500 dirhams from Smart4 Power. He seemed honest enough. I've no idea. Right, who's got the next comment or question, please?
How do you think that we can implement BIM, CAFM and everything together? Because I know that you know a great deal about it, but whenever I try and talk to our clients about it, they're often not really familiar with BIM and what it means and how we can integrate it. What do you think the next steps are for that?
Building information modeling. It's used in design, and all it is you can design it in BIM and it follows right the way through to the end user in terms of information. So it's an information flow from design to end user. The problem we have in this part of the world, we have high-end engineering companies, the big companies, the WSPs, the large engineering design companies. They're using BIM worldwide for design. Many of the contractors, the main contractors, are now using BIM. But the BIM products, Autodesk, who are the BIM product maker, they have not connected with the CAFM system solution providers. So you've got, when the project stops, the information stops. It doesn't carry on into the CAFM system and turn into your manuals and turn into your drawings and information. And that's where the gap is. If we could actually get that working and seamlessly going into operation, it would make our lives a lot easier in terms of running buildings.
Anybody else got any comments on this? The use of this kind of, building BIM type software. Is it relevant? Is it important? Is it just a gimmick? Any thoughts, any experiences?
I've got a very strong view on it based on that. If you kind of place the BIM model up until construction and handover is great. Beyond that is, a client selling and disposing of his building, when they do the full audit and they go, show us your BIM model, and you go, it's perfect, they've got all the information in there. It doesn't add any value to the overall building. So, for the BIM model to go beyond construction into FM, it has to be offering savings. But at the moment, the cost of changing 3D graphics, integrating it to your BMS system. Sorry, I'm using all the phrases now. But for me, is that in 20 years when they dispose of that property, is it generally going to increase the value of that property? Probably not. But at some stage there'll be a crossover, 5-10 years, where the integration will allow you to do energy monitoring of a property, asset capture within a property. But I just think at this stage it's just, the cost is too much.
Mickey, if I can ask you a question about a point Gundeep made about OPEX versus CAPEX. And in an ideal world, we would have boards of directors, chief finance officers who got it, who said, yes, absolutely, even if it does mean a slightly higher spend in CAPEX, I'm prepared to do that because it will lead to savings down the line in OPEX. Realistically, that's difficult, isn't it? Because finance chiefs are looking at the bottom line for the end of this year and the current financial quarter or the current financial year. To ask them to increase expenditure, CAPEX today, for jam tomorrow, it's a very difficult thing to do. What has been your experience, to the extent that you can share secrets, from Miras about talking to the board and saying, yeah, okay, this might cost a little bit more when we're building the project, but over the life cycle of the next 10 years, we'll get a saving. How do you find those negotiations with very senior level people?
I've only been in Miras since February, and I've found it very easy to do. So I did it in EMAR when I was in EMAR, and I've now followed the same pattern in Miras. So getting FM into the design is something I'm passionate about. Abdullah will back me up here. I was very passionate about it in EMAR, and I made sure that in our designs we put FM into place. I'm doing exactly the same in Miras, and I'm getting open ears. They're wanting to hear, they're wanting to understand how to save money in operation. So in Miras we're quite lucky that we've got people that are interested and happy to hear those sort of stories. We're talking about projects being built in 2018. We're involved in those sort of projects now, building FM into those projects.
Do you think, though, you were talking about Abdullah, who's here, Abdullah Al-Wahidi, who's the Senior Facilities Management Director at MR Properties. We'll hear from Abdullah in a few minutes' time on the next panel. But do you think that the MRs and the Miras of this world, the kind of very high-end developers, are they maybe the exception, and actually most of the second and third tier developers, it's a different story? Maybe you're lucky to be working at that level. I don't know, that's just my hunch. What do you think? What's the feedback you get from other guys in the FM industry who aren't working for such enlightened developers?
I think for the majority of smaller developers, they're not working at that level, and they don't engage with FM. It's very siloed, engineer, architect, etc. No FM involvement at design stage. So there's a lot of frustration in the FM community that FM is not engaged in design. And you hear a lot of people saying, well, it should be, If we could get involved in the designs of buildings, say 10 years ago, we would end up with lower service fees and everybody would be happy, right? But we were not involved in those designs at that stage. Future designs, it's happening. In terms of today, we're stuck with what we've got, so it's all about efficiency. How do we reduce our cost in terms of buildings? But I think in the future, we have to be involved and engaged at design level, at concept design level, to ensure that FM is built in.
We're almost out of time. I'm happy to take one more comment or question from the floor before we wrap this one up. Yes, please. Thank you, sir. Final question or comment to you.
So, I come from the IT industry. I help cloud service providers set up cloud services and sell them as IT services. What can we do to leverage, I want to leverage you, how can I do that? And what sort of cloud service can I offer? Technology cloud service. Maybe Mr. Singh, you're probably the most appropriate person to answer that.
Just to clarify, the
of
question
those
is,
connectors, which one worked, and which one of these can I develop an application that people can buy for 10 cents a minute or something like that? Thank you.
We worked on various solutions all across the spectrum, from smart solutions of IBM to EcoStructure of, let's say, Schneider, and we fundamentally chose one package and decided to implement it as a structural package to understand how the building works and how it's applied to various parts of, let's say, the IT structure of the building. Now, integrating IT as a whole onto, let's say, if you're reflecting only on the FM level, it's very difficult to explain. But if you want to look at building as a whole in IT and putting it together on the cloud, what you're really asking is that, I think this is what I said earlier, is that are you able to establish something which IBM has done, which I think is absolutely brilliant, and actually measure city level dynamics, look at benchmarking all across the city. A famous example is that they did the same thing in Los Angeles, and they started selling bills of one house to the next house. So the next house saw that this person is consuming less electricity than me, and why is that so? And it improved the efficiency by around 15% in Los Angeles itself. So if you look at IT, I think it's all about information, it's all about benchmarking, and it's all about integrating that benchmarking into some kind of structure which can be usefully applied at the end of it.
Fascinating insights. We'll leave it there. Thanks to our panel indeed, to Jason Rowland of Emerald, Mick Dalton of Miras, Alan Rowland of Novus Community Management, and Gundeep Singh of the Change Initiative. Thank you, gentlemen.